Well, counting today, there are exactly 23 days left until the presidential election of November 5th, 2024. Now, regardless of whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent, we all feel the intense political division in our country, and that division, unfortunately, can even extend into our families and our personal relationships. At a dinner conversation in early fall of 2016, I questioned the choice that some members of my extended family were making in regard to the presidential contest of that year. I now look back on that conversation with regret because nothing good came from that discussion. Now, hear me well, politics is important. But by its very nature, politics can easily lead to division and relational breakdown. And that's especially true in a representative democracy like ours. In stark contrast, we've all recently experienced the tremendous joy that can come when we're unified, as we were in the Olympic Games this past summer. See, at the Olympics, it doesn't matter whether you're black, white, brown, yellow, or red. It doesn't matter whether you're Democrat, Republican, or independent. It doesn't matter whether you're male or female, and it doesn't matter what event you're enrolled in. All that matters is that you're an American representing the stars and stripes to the very best of your ability. And you know this, that everyone on the American team is 100% in support of you, whether you're a gymnast or a basketball player or running track and field. Friends, unity is a precious commodity, and it's something that God deeply desires for his people because it glorifies him and it blesses us. That's what Psalm 133 is all about. Look at verse 1. It says, "How good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity." Now, this psalm is ascribed to King David. Many scholars think that it was written during the events described in 2 Samuel 5, when Israel in the north and Judah in the south were finally unified under David's leadership into a single national entity. And friends, please note, there's a strong sense of joy in verse 1. David is letting his people know that their unity was a good and pleasant thing that brought joy and happiness and energy and focus. Now, if there was ever a feel-good movie which illustrates the power of unity, it's that great film from the year 2000, Remember the Titans. And if by some chance you've never seen that, it's the true story of how the African-American coach, Herman Boone, along with the white coach, Bill Yost, and the co-captains of the football team, the white linebacker, Gary Bertier, and the black linebacker, Julius Campbell, together overcame fear and racism and distrust at T.C. Williams High School in Alexandria, Virginia, to create a unified team that went on to win the 1971 state championship. See, unity is a powerful force for good outcomes and good feelings. And that's especially true when it involves God's people. If today you were to drive out to DIA and you were to catch a plane from DIA to London, England, and then you were to get off the plane in London, England, and you were to take a train to the north of England to the great city of York, and then you were to rent a car in York and drive about 45 minutes to the northeast of York, you would come to the ruins of Rievaulx Abbey. Rievaulx Abbey was built by the Cistercian order of monks in 1132. Its first great abbot or leader was Aelred. And Aelred advised kings and he started other monasteries, and he became the most famous churchman in England in the 12th century. On one occasion, he said this: "When I was walking around the monastery cloister, I found not one brother in that whole multitude that I did not love. and by whom I did not think I was loved in return. It surpassed all the delights of this world, and I could truly say with the psalmist, behold how good and pleasant it is when brothers and sisters dwell in unity. See, Aelred noted what a beautiful thing the unity of God's people is, and David does the exact same thing here in Psalm 133. Look how he pictures this in verse 2. He says it's like precious oil poured on the head, running down on the beard, running down on Aaron's beard, down on the collar of his robe. Now, as you may remember, Aaron was the brother of Moses, and he was the first high priest of Israel who represented the people before God. David references him in this context as a symbol of the entirety of God's people. And he speaks of oil being poured on his head, his beard, and his robe as a picture of what unity among God's people looks like and feels like and smells like. Now, when you and I hear the word oil, our minds probably go to motor oil, or if we prefer, cooking oil. But when biblical writers speak of oil, they're always speaking of this perfumed ointment that was rubbed onto a person or poured onto a person, which heightened their senses and made them smell really, really, really good. Now, the analogy has some limitations. But for us, it would be almost like having a really, really good massage and then being bathed in the finest smelling version of oil of Olay that we could possibly imagine. See, not only does that oil make a person feel and smell really good, but friends, in the ancient world, it was a commodity of tremendous value. You probably all remember that story that's told in the Gospels about that woman who comes into the dinner meeting with all the disciples, and she anoints Jesus with this jar of oil, this jar of perfume. And all the gospel writers noted that that probably cost her a year's wages. Well, the oil that David speaks of being poured down on Aaron's beard is a picture for us of how sweet and how valuable unity is amongst us as believers. It's something we should cherish and seek out to the very best of our abilities because, friends, it facilitates God's blessing on our lives and on our families, and especially on our churches. David explicitly understood that. See, after years of running and hiding from King Saul out there in the Judean desert, and then finally being anointed king by the elders of both Israel and Judah, he knew from personal experience how crucial and how valuable and how sweet the unity of God's people is. And so to reinforce that, he uses a geographical reference that everybody in his audience would have immediately understood. Look at verse 3. He says, unity, it's as if the dew of Hermon were falling on Mount Zion. Now, Mount Zion's a reference to the location of Jerusalem. And as you probably know, it's located in the southern part of Israel, which is a desert. Mount Hermon is this gigantic 9,100-foot snow-covered mountain in the northern part of Israel, and its elevation made it a natural magnet for moisture of all kinds, from rain to snow to dew. David's saying here that unity among God's people is like the rich moisture of Hermon being rained down in buckets on God's people in the dry and dusty desert of Judea. And we all know from personal experience exactly what he's talking about here. I mean, for example, think about that really, really, really hot summer day just a couple of months ago, when maybe you went for a really long walk, or you were mowing the lawn, or you ran a race, or you were playing pickleball or some other sport. And after an hour or so, out in the heat, you were parched and then you picked up some ice cold water, or you picked up some lemonade, or you picked up a Diet Coke, and you came away alive because it tasted and felt so incredibly good. Well, when we're unified as a church, it brings refreshment, renewal. We could say it brings a sense of emotional resurrection. We're vibrant, we're alive, we're filled with joy. And David goes on and describes those feelings for us in the last stanza of the psalm when he says, "For there the Lord bestows his blessing, even life forevermore." Oh, friends, unity among God's people is sweet. It's refreshing. It brings life. I would say if we view this psalm from the perspective of the New Testament, I don't think we would be pushing its intent too far to say when we're unified as a church, when we're all on the same page, when we're all headed in the same direction, it's a little bit of a taste of heaven. I think most everybody in here knows who Billy Graham was, the greatest evangelist of the 20th century. Well, a few years ago, he passed, and before he passed, a Christian journalist sat down with him and just interviewed him, and one of the questions he asked Graham was, "What are you looking forward to?" And Billy Graham says, "When I die, I'll get to see God face to face and enjoy all the blessings of heaven." Well, that's so true. And if you and I know Jesus as our personal Savior, someday we will see God face to face, and we'll join Billy Graham and millions of other saints in experiencing the indescribable, the sweet, the refreshing, the inexplicable joys of heaven. But here's something else that's marvelous and actually pretty surprising. Because the Lord is so good to us and he's so gracious, sometimes he gives us a little taste of heaven in the here and now. And when we're truly unified as a church, as his people, and we're living out his calling as a church, we get to experience that. Not long ago, I read about a guy who had visited an asylum for the criminally insane. And he was really taken back by the fact that there were only 3 guards to take care of over 100 inmates. So he said to one of the guards, "Aren't you afraid that the inmates will unite and they'll overpower the 3 of you and they'll all escape?" And the guard said, "Crazy people don't unite." Well, maybe they don't, but as Christians, we should. And if we want the blessing of God to pour down on us in the fashion that David describes here in Psalm 133, we'd be wise to do everything in our power to unite us as a church. So that raises the questions. How can we create the kind of congregational unity that brings the blessing of God to every one of us? What does it take on our part to facilitate God giving us a little bit of a taste of heaven in the here of now? Well, let me make 2 suggestions. First, we would be wise to embrace the virtue of humility. Listen to what the Apostle Paul wrote to those very first Christians in that ancient Roman city of Philippi where he had planted a church. He said, "Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion." Now listen. "Then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you looking to the interest of others." There's a really, really, really good book that came out a few years ago by a writer by the name of John Dixon. It's called Humilitas. This is a terrific book. I've used it in my classes. I've used it in church world a little bit. I really, really like this book because Dixon shows that humility came from Jesus of Nazareth, and it quite literally changed the world. But I think for our purposes today, I like to use the definition that some kids came up with of humility when they built their treehouse out in their backyard. They put a sign up outside the treehouse that said, "Nobody act too big, nobody act too small, everybody act medium." Humility doesn't mean negating our opinions, our beliefs, or our convictions. We all have those. Humility means that we act medium by recognizing that other people here at Mission Lakewood have opinions, beliefs, and convictions. So the first thing we want to do is embrace the value and virtue of humility. Secondly, let me piggyback on Paul's opening words there in Philippians 2 and exhort all of us to go out of our way to encourage each other. You know this, and so do I. Encouragement is so important. It's important in our marriages. It's important in our parenting. It's really, really, really important in our relationships at church. Years and years and years ago, when I was on staff at Bear Valley Church, I had this event coming up. Put a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of money into the event. And in all honesty, it crashed and burned. And I was really, really discouraged and disappointed. 4 days later, I got this in the mail from one of the leaders in one of the ministries I was overseeing. She said, "Dear Scott, I've deduced that things this last weekend were not all they could have been, but I want you to remember something. Your steps are ordered by the Lord, and He knows how you feel. Plus, He knows what He wants for you. Don't let Satan discourage or distract you. Love in Jesus, Katie." That took place 35 years ago, and I kept that card because it meant so much to me. Friends, if everybody here at Mission Lakewood takes some active steps to encourage each other, and everyone here at Mission Lakewood lives out the virtue and the value of humility, collectively those will take us a long, long, long ways down the road to congregational unity. And that's what Psalm 133 is all about. From the Old Testament perspective, the Holy Spirit is speaking through King David to tell us that God's blessing will come if and when we're unified as a church. Now, I guess that most, if not all of you, agree with what I just said about the importance of humility and encouragement. And I don't doubt that everyone here agrees with the value of unity that David has described here in Psalm 133. I mean, after all, what's not to like about church unity? Who doesn't want that and the taste of heaven that it brings? So what's that look like for us here at Mission Lakewood in 2024 and beyond? Well, if you don't mind, and even if you do, I'm going to go from preaching to meddling. I'm going to do a little bit of a congregational diagnostic with you here. I'm going to ask you some questions. And as I do, I'd like for you all to do some personal and congregational inventory. First of all, as a church, are all of you aligned in your church's vision? Church's vision is what you want to see Mission Lakewood become in the next 5 years, 8 years, 10 years. It's a picture of the future. Are you aligned in terms of the vision of Mission Lakewood? Secondly, are you aligned in terms of the church's mission? The mission of Mission Lakewood is the actions it's taking or that it will take to accomplish the vision. And then thirdly, Are you aligned in terms of your church's core values? Core values are the essential things about Mission Lakewood that you all regularly reward. See, here's a key principle of life. We all regularly reward what we really value. You do, and I do. So if you could look at my day timer, you can look at my checkbook, and you can look at my credit card statements, you would determine very, very quickly, here are the things that Scott values because he's rewarding them with his time and with his money. That's true of you as well as me, and it's also true of churches. Churches always reward what they really value. And that means that whatever Mission Lakewood really values is visible by what you spend your time and what you spend your money on. So let me ask you again. Is the leadership and the congregation aligned on your vision, your mission, and your core values? Question number 2. Are your relationships rooted in humility and encouragement? Do you truly value each other? And are you taking the time and making the effort to really, really, really support each other? Are you encouraging each other, whether you're on staff or whether you're serving as an elder or whether you're participating as a very, very valued member of this congregation? Friends, I hope the answer to both of those questions about alignment and about humility and encouragement is yes. I pray that it is yes. Because I want you to know if the answer to those questions is no, the future for Mission Lakewood is not very bright. I didn't grow up in church world. I became a Christian when I was in college, and the very first church I got involved in was a church over in Southwest Denver. When I got involved there, the church had about 400 people, and it was really getting momentum. And over the next 2 years, about another 150 people joined the church. So by 1975, the church was hitting about 550, and I was still in my undergrad program. And some of the key people in the church realized that the neighborhood around the church had really, really changed in the prior 5 or 6 years. The neighborhood around the church had become primarily Hispanic and Spanish-speaking, and just to the northwest of the church, less than a mile away, were some projects where all these Vietnamese and Cambodian boat people had come who had survived the communist takeover of Southeast Asia. And they were all up there, and most of them were Buddhists. And so some key people in the church said, you know what? We have no ministry to them, and we don't know how to minister to these people. We need to change the way we're doing ministry here. And if we don't want to do that, what we need to do is sell the building to a church that will minister to Spanish-speaking Hispanics and will minister to Cambodian and Vietnamese Buddhists. And there was a small group of people who had been in that church for decades. And they said, no, we're not going to do either one of those. And when a lot of people realized we're not going to minister to our community, and we're kind of a drive-in church, we're a bunch of white people driving in, and we're not going to minister to the Buddhists up there, and we're not going to sell this building to somebody who can't, about 200 of them left. And then about a year later, this group of people fired the pastor, and another 200 people left. And then they hired an old pastor who was really conservative and not in good health, and he came in, and the church went from about 150 down to 50. And what happened eventually was they were forced to sell the building. You know, it didn't have to be that way. It didn't have to go that direction. It didn't have to have that tragic, heartbreaking ending. You see, what God wanted for that church, and what he wants for every church, and what he wants for Mission Lakewood, is for all the people to taste the heavenly blessings of congregational unity. You see, when the church is united, its members come pumped up for worship. And they love to hear the gospel preached. And over time, new people come to faith in Jesus. See, when the church is united, it grows both spiritually and numerically. It then begins to add on new services and new ministries, and it leverages its time and its talents and treasures to make an impact for Christ both locally and globally. Oh, friends, when the church is united, Jesus is zealously proclaimed. His Spirit fills its members with love and with grace, and His kingdom advances against all the powers of demons and death and darkness. Friends, I say this with all of my heart. May all of you here who make up Mission Lakewood, may you be united in the love of Jesus. May you be united in His mission of redemption to men and women and children. May you be united in the power of His Spirit. And may you bring a taste of heaven to this community this year and for decades to come.